It's interesting how, as my business grew, it became clear how integral, HR is to basically that future success of the business.
Skills development is something that is absolutely critical for a lot of HR agendas at the minute. They want to close the skill gaps. It's cost effective. People want to see a career path. They want to improve the skills of their organization.
Skill-based hiring is 3.5 times more effective than basically hiring on academic qualifications alone, which, considering the majority of the time we've been hiring based upon, your work experience or your academia, to suddenly say, well, this is over twice as effective is quite incredible and game-changing.
Today's episode of the HR L&D Podcast is sponsored by Deal. Now, take a moment, if you would, to consider the following pre-show scenario. Imagine you had to visit 16 houses just to cook your dinner. One place has the pots, another has the pans, another has the stove, and another has the food. You get the idea. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the reality is most global businesses operate exactly the same way, using 16 different tools and platforms to hire, manage, and pay their workforce. But now there's one platform that does it all, and that's today's sponsor. That's Deal. That's DEEL. And Deal is the all-in-one platform built for global work. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, from automated onboarding to performance assessments and beyond, you can manage the entire worker lifecycle all under one roof. Hire and onboard talent in over 150 countries, or run payroll in over 100 countries. Even offer competitive benefits, equity, and equipment. With Deal's industry-leading suite of HR tools, payroll solutions, and compliance services, you can scale globally with unmatched speed and expertise. So are you ready to transform your global HR system? If you are, click in the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deal today. That's DEEL. Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D Podcast. I hope it is your premier destination for exploring the cutting edge of HR and learning and development. And today we are joined by a fantastic guest who's going to be helping us to navigate how AI is revolutionizing the world of learning and development. Now, if you're not familiar with myself, my name is Nick Day. I'm CEO of JGA Recruitment. We're a specialist global HR recruitment firm. And I also, of course, host this wonderful show, which I hope is bringing you the insights that will help you to manage your workforces a little bit more effectively than before. Now, Fred Thompson is CEO of Thirst.io. They are at the forefront of leveraging AI to empower L&D teams to enhance learning cultures, talent acquisition, leadership development, and of course, to foster internal mobility and more. And with over 2 decades of experience in crafting dynamic learning environments, Fred today, I hope, is going to bring some invaluable information, a great new perspective that's really going to bring into view the revolutionary impact of AI in L&D. So, Fred, pleasure to have you with us today. How are you feeling?
Not so bad. I felt a little bit better before you said that I've been around for 20 years in the space. I don't feel like I'm that old so much, but hopefully I've remembered something from that amount of years, and happy to be here. Thanks, Nick.
Well, I'm glad you've been in it for that long. Similar to me in the world of recruitment, right? Because it gives us an indication of an understanding of where we've come from to where we are now. And we talk about AI, let's be honest, we weren't talking about AI in the way we are now 10, 15, 20 years ago. So you've seen that industry shift. But before we jump into the world of AI, the world of learning development, I'm going to ask you my first question, something I ask all of my guests, which is this: what do the words human resources mean to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I did listen back to a few of your shows previously, and I heard a guest a few weeks back saying that they generally sort of dislike the term. And I do tend to agree. I sort of had it in my mind drilled into me, I think, when I was in a sales capacity, that I used to refer to our team as consultants as being resources, and it's quite impersonal across the board. And I think the human resources term has that sort of old school phrase to it a little bit that has never really gelled particularly with me. But HR in general, it's interesting, despite the fact that I've founded a company and, connected to the space. Historically, initially, I didn't actually appreciate the function of HR particularly and what it provided. I always oddly felt it was a result of a company's success rather than, one of the reasons for its success. And it's interesting how, as my business grew, it became clear how integral, HR is to basically that future success of the business. And when we talk about the subsets of the role, which are probably what's more important for me, from the viewpoint of everything from culture and well-being and, the training and personal progression of the team members, the impact HR makes on an organization is pretty crucial. So I've definitely gone 360 in terms of what my initial thoughts were. But no, it's certainly, for me, it's a integral part of the growth of business.
Yeah, no, it's a nice place to start. I know today we're going to be talking all about AI as well. So I think in the context of AI's growing influence, and it really is, we're seeing it, a plethora of new tools coming into the HR space, and it really impacting the world of work at the moment. How do you perceive the role of human resources and L&D evolving? Because they kind of have to move hand in hand, right? We have to move with technologies. How are you seeing that from your side?
Yeah, I think we have to be a little bit cautious, I think. I've talked about it a couple of times before in terms of the AI side. For me, I think there's a FOMO to it. There is a kind of like everybody's running at it and trying to get there before anybody else and making sure they don't miss out because we've had this. And I've noticed quite a few things in the press recently are likening it to more of the dot-com boom, into boom and bust, effectively that sort of insane enthusiasm to it. There's obviously some actual something of subject behind it in terms of it's making a difference. I think in HR and L&D more specifically, I think we just have to be a little bit more cautious because our role is a little bit, has to be more considered in terms of, if we're putting a training platform out there that is teaching someone, I don't know, how, let's keep it simple, how to wire a plug. We can't go off what a generative AI tool might necessarily give us without validating that, without vetting it for its quality, because, if that gets it wrong, it has serious consequences across the board from the L&D side. So I think my, popular sort of opinion of where this is going from an AI from an L&D perspective is probably just more in assisting. So that can be around, actually curation of that content for validation. It can then also be around, personalization of that content as well, and making sure that gets it, surfaced to the right people at the right time. And it's just really looking at trying to almost use it as a little bit like an extra pair of hands. In terms of, instead of it being a person, it's an AI bot, as it were, and just trying to say, okay, what can it help me do that is sort of repetitive, a little bit mundane, time consuming? Where can it save me time? HR specifically, I've used it internally to actually build up job descriptions for job roles that we had, and I used it for along the lines of saying, okay, I've got a job description for a Ruby software engineer, mid-level in a cloud-based software as a service business. And it's really specific, but it actually gives me an absolutely perfect HR resume. You look through that from a job description, you think, yep, that's exactly what you need. And that's saved, these are things that you kind of dread to do in these positions because they take so much time. So for me, I would look at always running towards this technology because I love the new technology. I think it's great and we definitely shouldn't shy away. But I do think we've got to add a little bit of caution to it and make sure we're just sort of bearing in mind how important it is to get it right in our sector.
Yeah, and that's fair. I want to pull out a couple of words that I heard you mention there. I think it's quite interesting because on your website, you talk about the fact that we're moving into a new era of L&D. And a couple of the words you mentioned there was the idea of social learning, personalizing experiences in particular. And I would imagine that that's all part of this new era of making it more a social collaborative process, certainly make it more personalized. I know in my experience of going through different L&D programs back in the day, they certainly weren't personalized. They weren't even necessarily that collaborative, were very classroom led, and you kind of took everything in and forgot half it by the time you'd left. So are there any kind of specifics of AI driven approaches that are supporting in the tailoring, the bespoking nature of that personalization piece, or even the social side of it?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we're still getting there a little bit on that case. It is still like you were mentioning back in the day, it wasn't even on the radar, and it is still not on the radar of many organizations. It's coming more to the forefront. I mean, boiling it right back, what is social learning? Well, it's learning by, observing, imitating and sort of getting feedback from others, from your peers. And when remote work came around and the pandemic, it sort of changed that. It's quite hard to sort of observe and, imitate others that you're not necessarily seeing all day. So this is where we switch it up and we go back to the social learning, but using, facilitation by technology and saying, well, okay, we'll put a platform in that supports social learning, and, we can allow everyone in the business to share their knowledge, create a video, record an audio file, upload a PowerPoint, whatever that might be, create a quiz. But the problem here is there's just too much information. So all of a sudden, you turn that on, you just got so many people feeding that in, and there's no one really sort of validating it for its quality or for its accuracy either. So you go back to that same problem again. Now, this is kind of much the same problem that, search engines today still have the problem of there's so much information, but you ask it a question, it's got to try and surface the right information for you that's the most relevant, most factually correct, etc. And they solve it by going to technology. They solve it by putting tools in place like this. So when we can start to think about observing the content that's there and saying, using technology and parts of AI to say, okay, is this content popular? Do users stay on this content and undertake that learning? How much time do they spend there? Are they interacting with this content? You can start to translate that content that's coming from social learning and other sources and start to effectively rank that learning content based upon interactions and bubble that up, bubble the higher quality learning to the top. And that simply is too difficult and time consuming to do without technology being there realistically. But this is then where it gets even more interesting for me, because I think you can do that as a base level, but then you can add a extra layer of, hyper personalization on top of that. So you're factoring in everything that a user does, that a learner does. So that might be, how do they tend to interact with the content? Are they tending to upvote or watch more YouTube style content learning or, listen to a podcast? And then essentially we can translate that and add that personalization on top to say, well, you're both seeking the same content, but the content that's surfaced to, Bob versus Jeff or whatever that means, is going to be a different type of content because that's how they tend to prefer content of different formats, different styles, different authors, whatever that might be. So all of this is, for me, is brilliant. I think from the AI and the levels that it can do and the way it can automate this personalization and social learning, I think is making a difference.
Can I ask you a question then? Something springs to mind here. So I've got my, going a bit off piste here, but hopefully it'll make sense. I've got my son is going through some tutoring at the minute for his 11 plus, right? And I saw an app advertised, or an app or a program that was completely AI led that said, if you want to learn, this is the way to do it. Get your children for 11 plus into this. And it works in real time. It answers them in really simple ways. And it's kind of they do these guaranteed success things. And for me, I was thinking, well, I know how bespoke the kind of coaching is for my son. I know what his needs are. I know how the tutor works with him to understand the individualized requirements. But I've never used the platform, so I've no idea how good or effective it might be. But I'm interested to understand, because clearly the capability of that kind of AI-based learning has evolved significantly if it's able to do those things. And I've always said that maybe that where the difficulty lies is in the contextualization of information, that AI is going to have more of a challenge to understand the nuances of human behavior, perhaps more than humans themselves. So I would, from my perspective, there's always a role for humans to play in that learning process. And I've taken the tutoring personalized route for my son at the moment. But I'd be interested to get your perspective on it. Now, how advanced are we here? And how critical is that human experience to the learning journey for successful outcomes? Do you think it will always, and if it is critical, do you think it always will be?
Yeah, I mean, how advanced we are is an interesting one, because we're sort of in that revolutionary phase almost now. It's one of them game-changing elements, which is interesting. There's I think I saw a TikTok the other day which was talking about there's two revolutions that have come at once, and one is in AI and the other is in the Vision Pro sort of technology, that augmented reality VR kind of headset kind of concept. And you don't get these kind of revolutions as often as you think. We had internet and mobile phones previously to that, but then there's been a large gap. Now, I've heard AI talked about probably for all of my 20 years that I've been in this space, but it's always been very thin. The substance is not there. And as recently as sort of, I think it was 2022, when I was at a learning technologies event, and I was speaking to vendors there who, correctly, as you just said, Nick, you have this problem where there's so much content and it's trying to, put that into the right sectors, trying to classify it the right way, trying to say, well, that relates to this skill or this topic, or this is at this level, it's a beginner or it's an expert level, and trying to catalog that. And the vendors at an LT in 2022 were really wrestling with this problem. Like, they didn't have a great solution for it. And some of the solutions even still relied upon manual sort of, observability of it and tagging the content. Fast forward literally less than 12 months, and all of a sudden you've got a real and elegant solution in the forms of the advancements of AI to that problem that we couldn't even see on the horizon, 12 months prior to that. So I don't want to say we're at the start of this particularly, because, like I said, the AI side of it has been going on so long. It's just the bump up has suddenly, changed in terms of the quality there. But in terms of understanding how to use it, I mean, that's the most interesting part, I think, because you can go into ChatGPT or something similar today, and I can. But it now becomes a skill in order to prompt it in the right way to get the right data, which is like a completely different skill that we never imagined we'd need to understand how to talk to AI. We do. As we get better at that, you're going to get better sort of, understanding of that content, better tagging of that content, and it's going to end up surfacing it better. So I think we are in for a good ride on this. I think there's going to be a lot of good progress in it. But it does point me back to the very early start. We have to be cautionary because at this stage it can still get that wrong, and it's better than everything we had before, but it's still not going to be the very best it'll ever be. It'll keep progressing. So we need to keep that in mind and keep monitoring its progress, I think.
Sure. I'm bringing it back then to an HR perspective here. We know that skills development is something that is absolutely critical for a lot of HR agendas at the minute. They want to close the skill gaps. It is cost effective. People want to see a career path. They want to improve the skills of their organization. So if we know that that's a key part of continuous learning, how well is AI positioned to identify and close those skill gaps, maybe more efficiently than maybe traditional methods?
Yeah, I think when I referenced the sort of learning technologies conversation, it was a case of vendors who were trying to match content to skills, and they could always do it in a very basic way, but quite often it was a manual side of it. And, even nowadays in the platforms that I wrote today, and First is one of them that does this, it is automatically tagging the content that it sees based upon, that title of that content, or actually the content inside it, against a skills framework that's there. And then that is then being used in the personalization side. So it can help match that content. And skills in general, it's just incredible how that's changing as well alongside social learning. So, they are the modern L&D currency, aren't they, really? And the main oddity to the skills side of this is it requires a really big shift in the way that companies and organizations think in terms of, how they shift in their corporate hiring and their development strategies as well. But the skills side of HR and L&D in particular, like the stats are incredible. Like the studies, I think there's research from McKinsey where they said that the skill-based hiring is 3.5 times more effective than basically hiring on academic qualifications alone, which, considering the majority of the time we've been hiring based upon, your work experience or your academia, to suddenly say, well, this is over twice as effective is quite incredible and game-changing. So we need to be looking at how we combine a skills-based approach alongside social learning and getting the best value we can by using these AI tools to kind of do that as well. So it's really nice to see how we can kind of categorize that content, put them in the right skill, personalize that. And, I think that's making a difference for people in an organization in the workplace.
Yeah, you mentioned the word personalization there. That's the thing that I'm most excited about in the world of L&D, the idea of having a personalized pathway for me which will be different to my colleagues, because as you say, we all learn differently. We have, we'll go to different channels on YouTube, whatever it might be. We learn differently. Some are visual learners, we all have so many different needs to cater for. And we do know that from studies suggest that adaptive learning, the idea that we can be a training pathway can be flexible to consider the adaptive requirements we have, can be really, really effective. I know that you're really big on social learning. You've got a social learning platform there that is designed to adapt and evolve based on the skills and preferences of the users. So tell us a little bit more about that. How are you leveraging AI in making an experience more adaptive and more effective?
Yeah, well, this is it. So historically, adaptive learning pathways have still been a relatively sort of manual affair. They have been around requiring a L&D manager to curate a pathway, with optional modules or selective content based upon, grades or performance. And whilst, studies do show adaptive learning pathways in general are very successful, statistically, that doesn't tend to bear out in terms of that success for the learner. In terms of, studies are showing 20% of employees feel their current learning pathways aren't relevant. And it's ultimately because it's quite difficult. The issue is largely difficult task to cultivate that pathway correctly, making sure it proves effective, making sure the quality is there. It takes time to produce. And that's what I think we can start to adjust with technology. But I would now think of it as saying it's less about an adaptive learning pathway as if it's a single path that you can go down for a certain learner journey. And more that we're seeing that as the whole journey on the entirety of the platform, as the aspiration of the learners are wanting to learn new skills, their whole experience is being tailored and adapted as they progress through each step. So on Thirst, for instance, as you kind of get onto our dashboard, the first thing you're presented with is, what's hot for you effectively, is the latest recommendations for you. And they're factoring absolutely everything in terms of, the skills that you've got, the skills that you're seeking, the skills that you're certified in terms of how you engage, what type of content, who you follow. And that's then bringing up, and as well as we play into that, compliance and mandatory elements as well.
Sure.
But it's just bringing all that together. So social learning is brilliant because it brings a lot of really good content in. But it's no use without that personalization side, because there's too much information there. You bring that personalization in, all of a sudden you're getting surfaced the right content without having to go and find it, and without an L&D manager having to curate it. So I think the adaptive learning pathways is wider than that now. And I think you're starting to see it, like in Thirst, in the entirety of the kind of the environment that you work in. I think I had a really nice analogy that I always like, which is, there's an app that you might use, which is called Waze, which is a popular navigation app that you use in your car or when you're out walking. And it leans on this connected network of other users, basically reporting what they see or what they've done. So they say there's a crash or a police car or a pothole or something like that. And Waze will quickly tailor, the pathway, as it were, to your destination, based on all this effectively social knowledge of that network being fed in. Now, of course, you can still get to your destination with one of the old school A3 paper road atlas, of an LMS type of product. But, you're not benefiting from that knowledge of others. You're not benefiting, from even finding out about a new road that you didn't exist because of an app like Waze. So I think that ties back in terms of, it sounds like L&D. You kind of have this, you're benefiting from the knowledge of others that you wouldn't have typically had. And you've got using technology like a Waze app, like a learning platform like Thirst, that can actually tailor that information, make sense of it, and surface it at the right point to you. So, yeah, I think the combination is everything together. And I think that's where the new era of L&D gets so exciting, because I think on their own, they don't make as much sense, but you tie them all together and all of a sudden you have a bit of a different approach.
No, I like that. I think there's a piece then that I would like to tackle then. So let's use your Waze analogy here. You've got the personalization piece, you've got the social element. Bring those things together, and hopefully you get there faster. And in that instance, it's easy to measure, right? Because if you get to your destination quicker than you would have done by looking at maps, getting stuck in a road jam, whatever, it's very easy for you to measure the level of success. Now, if you're an HR director or an HR professional or an L&D professional responsible for these large scale programs, it's a big investment. Not just in terms of financial cost, but time putting your employees through these learning pathways and through these platforms. Therefore, the ability to measure success becomes really, really critical. And we know that people want to see a good return on investment. They want to see that the learning is having an impact on a business. And certainly back in the day when I started, we'd go to a classroom, the course would cost X. You'd come out with your folder at the end of it in your ring binder, and you'd remember some of it. But there wasn't really a lot that came back to measure the impact of the courses that we did, apart from the qualification on your wall. So tell me a little bit about how you go about measuring success, bringing in the social element, bringing in the personalization element for those that are interested in the return on investment of these courses, if they're the ones, responsible for making the investment and putting people onto the courses. How do you go about measuring success? And maybe you're leveraging AI to do that as well. I don't know. It'd be great to understand.
Yeah, I like to think of this, you've got to boil it back down to what are you trying to measure it for? So I think, historically, and you mentioned it there, where you sort of just got the certificate on your wall, and that was the only thing. It was, did you complete it or not? And historically, it was always like, have you completed that training? What score did you get? Did you pass? And what kind of time did you do it in? And that was it. And it's sort of arbitrary. It doesn't really add too much other than confirming they've really, really done it. And does it? How good is that to you? How good is that to you to the business? Is always a difficult one to formulate. And similarly, learning platforms have only ever really tracked what they consider engagement in that platform as being things really basic along the lines of, how many users are logging in, what percentage of them are active, how many completions in total. It's an arbitrary number. It doesn't really sort of give you that full picture. So I would reverse it back round and say, well, why are we trying to track, and what are we trying to track? Ultimately we want to make sure our teams, our people are being the best they can be. They are providing the most value to the business. They're providing value to themselves. They're progressing themselves in their career. Ultimately, it's boiling back down to the wheels of business in such an expectation. So I would be looking at different things at a platform level to track. I'd be looking at things like the cost of a training of an employee, a simple KPI of what's relative to the investment made and what's the time to competency of that person. So it's not necessarily did they complete it in 2 minutes, it's how long before we are certifying you or you're passing the assessment, and look to reduce that with L&D. So as you bring more focused training in, can you see that time to competency reduce? So it's less about individuals, it's more about generalizing and saying, okay, can we see that L&D collectively is making a difference? And if we track this really, really well, there's studies again which show massive commercial benefit to the business. There's research by Burson and Associates shows that companies that track employee learning and development are 26% more likely to be ahead of their competitors. So you've got to track it, but you've got to track the right things. Like I said, the arbitrary numbers don't make as much sense. So I always bring it back down to saying, okay, how can we actually track? What can we track here that's really interesting and that's going to benefit? Can we bring that back down to the business needs of the company? Can we bring that down to essentially from a company level, the profitability, or how do we progress that personal? And, what if we can track movements of a person's competency within a skill rather than saying, okay, they've certified in X or they've completed assessment Y. If you see they're actually getting better at whatever database analysis or something like that, you can actually they're getting better themselves. And you can then, as a business, you can see that. What if you can, from this, start to judge that you are lacking in an area in terms of there's not as much training in a certain sector, a certain skill, a certain topic that's there again. So you can start to leverage the technology to analyze trends. It's trend-based analysis really, rather than, numbers and statistics, to sort of change how we approach it and how we provide benefit. And then what about if we thought about completely different metrics altogether? So we're used to tracking completions, great. But what if we track things like the number of discussions that a user has or a learner has, and the number of likes and shares and comments? And we actually focus on what is their effective collaboration within the business? What value are they providing to their wider team, to their subordinates, to the business in a whole? That's a completely different metric than did they just click through the page turner? Does that lead to employee progression? Does that lead to promotions or lateral moves or increased responsibilities? These are the things that I think are more essential holistically to an employee, but also certainly to the business as a whole as well.
Hello, HR and people leaders. Are you exhausted of the war for talent cliche? The problem is when we hear a cliche, it usually exists for a reason. However, we think it's time for a fresh approach to the talent crisis. That's because at JGA Recruitment, we understand the real challenges you face in sourcing phenomenal HR and people candidates. And guess what? We think we have the solution. Our team is on a mission to revolutionize your hiring process. That's because we're not just recruiters. We're strategic partners dedicated to finding HR and people professionals who align perfectly with your company's vision and goals. So let's break the cycle of frustration together. Partner your talent acquisition strategies with JGA Recruitment and experience the difference in service, excellence, and results. No longer do you need to suffer the costs associated with a poor hire, because with over 100 five-star Google reviews and already trusted by many of the world's leading brands, why don't you take action today? Contact us at jgarecruitment.com to discover how we can help transform your HR and people teams. And here's a bonus. When you visit us, you can sign up for our weekly HR newsletter that's packed with invaluable industry insights and more. Let's revolutionize your HR talent acquisition strategies together and make the war for talent a cry from the past. Visit jjrecruitment.com to find out more.
Yeah, that leads me to a question I'd like to ask you, actually. But before I do, you're right about the trend side. For me as a recruiter, the obvious ones would be, we know a lot of employees are looking for a company that will invest in their training and their development and their ability to move through a process, right? And I think that offers that. But also then on the back of that, you should see bigger trends in things like retention. If you're giving people the right pathways and the right tools to develop and skill, they're going to be more empowered within their firms. They're going to be more bought in, more engaged. And hopefully you'd see the knock-on effect of that, or the knock-on impact of that, of being better retention for your brand. And we know that the cost of attrition can be very, very expensive, that good talent leaving your business is very expensive. Finding new talent is one of the biggest challenges that HR directors say they're struggling with at the moment, is finding top talent. So I think they're definitely the bigger trend piece. You mentioned the word there, I think you mentioned the word collaboration. And I want to talk about that briefly, because in a social learning experience, how does an AI learning experience help cultivate a culture of collaboration? Because when we think about, or when a lot of people think about AI, they don't necessarily think about it in terms of human collaboration. This almost can be seen as being in, contradiction to each other. I don't think that necessarily is the case, but the way that we often think about those things separately, they can be. So I'd love to know how we can utilize AI to actually cultivate more collaboration rather than the other way around.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because AI in general here, and again, going back to kind of the early point here, we've got to make sure we're using it for the right tools and the right purposes across the board. And, we've all sort of engaged with a AI bot that is almost a fake collaboration of trying to get some support on something. And it largely drives everybody mad. And even though still the AI bots of today are miles better than they were, there's still generally people don't prefer that as an option. So you have to be careful about trying to just put technology into absolutely everything and saying that that's going to be the solution, because it's not going to bring that. What it can do is facilitate the actual collaborative environment. So, where the platform is allowing people to create that social learning and is surfacing. So, for instance, the first platform, you can actually follow colleagues in your business in, similar job roles to you or whatever that might be. And you can effectively, you're going to get surfaced more of the content that they engage with, that they comment on, that they post, because that's in your interest, because you've sort of said that person's maybe got a job role or career progression that you kind of, aspire to lead towards, or they're just a thought leader in your space. And by having that sort of personalization layer on top of it is how we foster that collaboration. It's not necessarily making people talk, but it's sort of highlighting the content that's there and sort of, that's a really interesting piece, and I've got a thought myself on that, and I will comment back on it. So it's more that surfacing of the content that the collaboration works on that I think is where that value is brought. The employee retention piece is just an interesting one. I just think, every indicator that you ever see, studies for what feels like hundreds of years, probably tens of years, but many, many years, has just sort of always led to the cheapest and easiest way for your business to get better is to train and retain your staff. So it is an absolute no-brainer. And I think if you can then leverage the technology to trend analyze and spot things which actually would be quite time consuming for you to do personally as an L&D manager, then it gets more interesting. So you could not only employee retention, you can start to see, well, hold on, the whole division here is actually not losing versus another division who are losing. Let's map that back to why might that be? Are they interacting more with this content? Have they got more content in that skill? Are they getting a different result or a different delivery from our L&D department, from our L&D platform than the other one? And it's really difficult to put that into place if you're trying to map that manually. But with trend analysis, using the technology, you can start to see that. And you can just change the space of employee retention in one division by effectively analysing that across the board. So, there's interesting ways how we can get different data out now that just wasn't possible previously.
I mean, for me, it's easy. I'm an easy convert. Right? I'm fully believe in the way that you're approaching the learning journey. But there will be some people that listen to this who perhaps are resistant to it. They're not quite sure whether a social learning orientated approach is going to be quite right for them. So for people, and I'm sure you come across this resistance regularly, for people perhaps showing an interest in Thirst in your platform, or just whether you're talking generally, what are the kind of things you would say to leaders to help them overcome that resistance? Because I know you've got lots to think about here, from personalization to AI to,
there's lots, isn't there? And it does take a bit of a business shift and a culture shift to sort of put these things into place, especially if you're used to that page turner, compliance, click, click, click kind of approach to it. I mean, don't get me wrong, investment in any form of L&D realistically is a win-win for both the employer and employee. It's always beneficial. Just in general, there's some incredible statistics. I think there's a study by the American Society for Training and Development, which found that organizations that spend, I think it's $1,500 per employee in training, compared to those who invest, I think it's $125 per employee, on average see 24% higher profit margins to the business. Wow. Which is just a mind-blowing statistic. I think it's like over 200% increase in revenue per employee. And what's that, £1,000 more per employee? And that difference is unbelievable. So there's so much sort of research and studies that really just L&D in general, is where you need to be. I would always go back to pointing to evidence and statistics to back any argument up really around, why we should do social learning across the board. I think it's time consuming for L&D to provide the relevant learning content. So social learning is helpful in order to allow colleagues to share that information. So, you can continue to upskill their peers without a full reliance on a large L&D team. They back this up. I think 72% of organizations believe social learning platforms will be important or very important in the next 3 years. So again, you're seeing this trend across the board. And McKinsey and Company discovered that organizations with strong leadership and culture of continuous learning are 30% more likely to be top performers in their industry. So you want to put this into place. You simply can't really afford to ignore social learning within your organization. AI is going to help you keep the cost down a little bit in terms of, adding them layers in where it can do the jobs that you couldn't do before and personalizing user journeys, etc. But, that personalization is still really key. I think when we talk about social learning, I think the quality of and the relevance of the content that your peers can feed in is quite different. So if you are thinking about whatever that might be, a marketing course or something similar for your business, generic marketing courses may be very different to how your marketing operation works in your business. So tacit knowledge sharing from your peers in that space is going to give you more relevant content to your job, to your role, to your position, to how you can progress that. So whilst there's a semi sort of scared approach to social learning because it opens up the kind of the house to everybody in some regards, doesn't it? Everyone can sort of feed in with the right kind of governance and controls on that, and using technology to sort of augment that. I think you can see some really big benefits from it.
Well, I mean, ultimately, that's what you guys do at Thirst. Right? So tell us a little bit about your platform and how, for those that maybe are concerned about, as you say, opening up the doors to so much socialized learning pathways potentially and opinions and everything else. And you said there are things we can do to protect it. Tell us a little bit more about your business, your platform, if anyone's interested in finding out more about this kind of experience and this new way of learning, the new era of L&D, as you put it. So if they want to find out more, they can understand what the business is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Thus was born out of a frustration of being in the space for 20 years and seeing the same learning platforms and being, unenthusiastic about using them realistically. We've all sat there and done the page turners and they're not what it's about. And we started looking at holistically, how do we learn? How do we want to learn in our business? And I tend to consume, feeds and newsletters and reading news articles and browsing certain things. And you start to realize there's this feed of information that's coming through. And it was trying to sort of match that same concept. And then effectively trying to employ more modern approaches to it that we see in everything else. So we talked heavily on personalization today. But, a lot of people don't realize how much personalization is in the common apps that they use all the time. So we think about like Netflix, that's your list of movies you're going to watch are going to be different to somebody else's. And that works really well. Amazon's going to recommend you different products based upon that as well. And you see it really successfully employed. But also user experience, user interface. A lot of the learning environment has that sort of dated approach. We tend to be a little bit behind in this sector. So it was coming at all that and saying, how do we reimagine it? How do we come at it with, an environment you want to learn, an app you want to actually open up every morning because that's where you get your learning content because it's surfacing the right things to you. But how do we still deal with, the things that still need to be done? You still need the compliance in there. You still need to be able to assign the mandatory learning. You still need to track that and get your reports out of that. But how can we innovate on that? So, our platform is all focused around that. It's social and community based within an organization. So you can see your peers, you can see what content they've posted, you can kind of engage with them. Every learning piece of content in there, you can bookmark and share. You can also comment on that as well. It's automatically tagged to skills. You can dig into your skills and start to look into learning a skill in a different way. So it changes the way you approach it rather than it being pushed upon you and the learning and saying you have to do these three things. You start to do some of that because you still have compliance generally in most organizations, but it's more a case of you're pulling it towards yourself and you're saying, okay, I'd like to learn this. This is where I'm actually getting the most relevant information because it's from my peers, it's from live feeds in, and it's also compliance led as well. So that's what we're doing over there at Thirst. Changing the game on the new era of L&D. It's a really nice place to be at the moment. I think as businesses see the differences in approach and the way technology is leading this and changing this space, I think we're going to see quite an uptick in terms of how L&D approaches this. And I think it's going to become more of the norm that the social learning aspect is going to become quite prime and key to the way organizations deliver L&D.
Yeah, no, for what it's worth, I fully agree. I think that's the way the industry is moving. And it's great to have someone on the show who's at the cutting edge of that. So thanks so much for joining me to give us give all of our listeners a really good overview of how AI is immersed now in the world of L&D and what the new era of L&D looks like. I guess let me ask one question before we open the vault, Fred, if I may, which is, what's next on the horizon? I like to look, let's go a bit further into the future. Well, no social learning is coming now. You said next 3 years can have a major impact. Let's go a little bit beyond that time. A lot of people are talking about augmented reality and different ways of learning by going into, the augmented space, so to speak. Maybe it's that, maybe it's not, but I'd love to get your view on what do you think, 5 years from now, what's the next thing to prepare ourselves for potentially?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And predicting the future, as we always find out on the Tomorrow's World videos that we look back from 30 years ago, are completely terrible at predicting. So I'll caveat all my predictions with that kind of approach. But I like at the moment the idea of just sitting back and watching some of the things that are happening and waiting. So, we referenced Vision Pro at the start of this conversation, and it's an expensive product at the moment, and it's changing that space in terms of how we operate and whether we think it's great or not, in terms of it's a big thing and it's got a big charging cable and it's not quite prime time ready, in my opinion, yet. But it is a technology that is quite incredible. At the moment, its use case is, I can put them on and I can put a big browser window in front of me on the screen, or a video screen up here, or an Excel document down here. And I don't understand that. I feel like it's not solving anything. And I can't quite remember who this is accustomed to as a quotation. But there was a case of when horses were basically the transport way that you get around the country. I think someone said it might have been Henry Ford or someone along them lines. And he said if you ask people what they want, they will tell you it's faster horses, because they can't quite see, what the next thing is going to be. And I think the Vision Pro is a little bit like that. We've got this technology. We just put more browser windows in it or more videos because we haven't quite understood what the next iteration of that correctly is. And I was in the training space in VR when the Oculus first came about, and that was very different. We built parachute trainers with full rigs where you could you basically be a parachutist, and you could put out fires if you're in a fire service with a make-believe kind of like hose. And that immersive kind of VR training was very good. The technology at that point wasn't quite as good as it needed to be really real. So if I'm just going to probably hang my hat anywhere, but I don't think it's as quick as 5 years, but it would probably be around the more immersive side and using that technology sort of increase that we've really seen. It's a more costly experience. It's a more time consuming to build, but for real life environments that you can't put people in, like parachutes and, putting out fires, it will be a completely different kind of approach that I think would be incredible to watch how that progresses.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've had previous guests on the show actually talking about this in more detail. I like the idea from an HR perspective anyway, the idea that you can have an immersive experience in someone else's shoes, feeling how it feels to be, someone who is less able or a person of color, all those different things. Because it's impossible for me to know from my current perspective. Really, if we're able to create that immersive experience and how things are different, I think it'll really help raise awareness, which is really important. And I don't know, I think that there's some in clever ways it can be used if we get it right. So I'm quite excited to see how that evolves, and even if it does, and it becomes mainstream or not. So it was good to get an expert's perspective for sure. But listen, let's open the HR L&D vault. So we've got 3 short, sharp questions for you. The first is this: if you had one piece of advice to the world, what would it be?
Oh my. It probably goes outside of HR. I'd probably say slow down. I think there's a fascination in just running at everything and trying to get as quick as possible. We're recording this in the early part of the year, but we've already lost about 6 weeks of the year that seem to have disappeared in my world. And you sort of spend your time looking at computers and screens. And I love technology. I love it how it moves. But I think, if we can slow down a little bit and just take in outside of technology a few times, that would probably be my advice.
No, fair enough. There's a coaching phrase that says we need to slow down to speed up. And someone said to me recently as well, Nick, the workplace would be a much better environment if everyone learned to respond rather than react. Just take a breath, understand what's going on and then respond rather than go straight in. So
yeah, indeed. We're trialing an experiment at the moment at first where we've actually moved our operations from using the Zoom and Slack combination to using a product called Roam. And its whole idea is to bring a virtual office back. And it's the idea that you can actually see people in their office and then you can just sort of drop in on them, ask them a question and drop back out. And it's bringing that sort of that social element back, that communication, that kind of personality back to that remote environment that I think is lost on group chat and things like that. So it's not necessarily ties directly to slowing down, but that whole idea of just get back in the moment with the people that are there as real people. So technology is great, but there's a lot more power, I think, in the connections you can make.
Yeah, nice. Number 2, if you had the opportunity, what advice would you give to a younger you just starting out in this new world of work?
But I think it would be absorb everything you can all the way through, because I think, the obvious phrase that knowledge is power, but I think the more you can remember, store, have experiences of, it generally does work out better. But I would also say just work from a position of trust in people rather than a distrust. And, the majority of my experience with the majority of people in the world have been that they have been pretty decent people and they've been really good and they're ultimately doing the best work, or they're trying to do their best work. And I think if you work from that position, you should hire the people who are ultimately better than you at all points. Try and pick the people who are, obviously are, and encourage them to put your trust and faith in them. I think I didn't learn that lesson enough or quick enough. I don't think from my side. I think I had the sort of very selfish feeling that I was the best and I could do it all and things like that. And I think you're a much more powerful outfit when you've got a lot of people around you who are better than you.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think it's something we do hopefully grow out of. I think I was probably the same going back 20 years, but maybe it's...
you don't listen is the problem, do you? If you're young, you probably wouldn't listen to this podcast and necessarily take that advice, but yeah.
And last but not least, what is the guiding principle behavior you've seen in every great leader that you've worked with?
Oh, wow. Every great leader I've worked with. Humility, probably, I think, would be the thing. I think just, I guess it's a relatively obvious one to some degree, but yeah, I've seen some really bad leaders. I've seen some people who are really, there's micromanagement, there's shouting, there's that. I mean, there's a great analogy which is around you judge everybody else's decisions on a different basis than you judge yours. So you can explain away why you've done something, but you won't use the same reasoning as to why somebody has done something else. You use it differently. And the real leaders will understand that generally the people are trying to do the best work, or they're trying to actually, help the business, or they're trying to come together as a team, and maybe things didn't work out. But it's also understanding that, like you said, people can do things better. It's that approach that people want to work with you. You're not that leader in the all powerful position. People will respect you more in the way that you respect them would be the thing. So I think that humility probably ties back quite well.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Hard to disagree with anything you've said today, Fred. So listen, thanks ever so much for joining me. Of course, for those that want to find out more, there will be a link in the show notes. You can find out as well going to thirst.io. That's THIRST.io, thirst.io. And of course, if you want to find out more about our business, you can go to JGARecruitment.com. I want to say to everyone, thank you for listening to today's episode of the HR L&D podcast. I'm hoping this conversation has sparked some learning and development ideas, perhaps raised some questions. And of course, if you are navigating some really complex staffing issues in the world of HR, HRS, or L&D, then that's where our organization can help. You're not alone, so do get in touch. And that's JGARecruitment.com as well. And of course, do stay tuned for our next episode. We've got some really exciting guests coming onto the show. So remember to subscribe. Remember to share the episode with all of your HR colleagues and friends. And I look forward to being the next episode real soon. Fred Thompson, thanks ever so much for joining me today on the HR L&D podcast.
Today's episode of the HR L&D podcast is sponsored by Deal, the all-in-one global people platform that simplifies how you manage the entire global team lifecycle. From contractors, direct employees, EOR, and more, you can manage them all in one place with Deal. Hire and onboard talent in over 150 countries in minutes, or run payroll in over 100 countries with just one click. Offer competitive benefits, equipment, and equity from a single dashboard. dashboard. Even customized career roadmaps, performance assessments, and more for your team through Deal's suite of AI-powered learning and development tools. So no matter your global business goals, Deal's team of over 200 legal experts keeps you compliant with local laws every step of the way. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deal is built to meet your unique global HR needs. Ready to transform your global HR? Click the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deal today. That's DEEL.